You so much, Victoria. Hi, everyone. As Victoria said, my name is Brenna Cameron. I'm an attorney over at Bay Area Legal Services. I'm excited and happy to be here today. Always nice to talk to community providers, puts a little variety in my schedule, which is nice. Today, we're just going to be talking about gender and sexual orientation and the policies that kind of the history in the past couple of years that have dictated the policies that everyone has to follow. You'll hear me say this like 10 times throughout the presentation, but follow the money. If you're getting federal money, you gotta follow the federal strings that they attach to that money. So that's what this is going to be about, or the strings that the federal government's attaching. So just really quick roadmap. I'm starting in 2012. There was the equal access, like kind of the first rule that HUD promulgated related to it. It was a step in the right direction, but there were some problems with it. We'll get into that. For context, Obergefell v. Hodges was in 2015. That was the Supreme Court case that legalized gay marriage. After that, HUD was like, oh, okay, gotta develop some of our things. They passed a new rule in 2016. Then in 2020, you may or may not have heard about this case. It wasn't quite as famous, I don't think, as Obergefell, but the Bostock case. Excuse me, sorry. That was a Title VII case that we'll get into about sex discrimination. And then again, after that case got promulgated, the president, with the executive order, directed all agencies, hey, comply with this new federal case. And so then HUD did with that next round. So that's what we're going to be doing today. So let's start. Let's go into 2012. This was HUD, one of HUD's first rules that kind of dealt with this issue of people that were sexually diverse or had non-binary genders. So those of you not familiar with that, binary genders, man, woman, non-binary genders, everything else. So the final rule, it goes through a massive administrative process. If those of you who are familiar with administrative law, you know how tedious and bureaucratic these processes can get. Final rule was passed in 2012. It defines gender identity as actual or perceived gender-related characteristics, which was a step in the right direction other than man or woman. But many of you can probably see some problems with this already. And also, who gets to determine gender identity when you're talking about perceived characteristics? Is it the person getting to dictate their own gender, or is it the provider saying, you are this gender because I said so? Some problems there. Sexual orientation, they explicitly meant homosexuality, heterosexuality, or bisexuality. That was it. You were one of those three. Congrats. Which again was a step in the right direction, because prior to this, it had just been heterosexuality. So they added two new ones, which is great. The kind of some of the good stuff that this rule did, it did revise the definition of family. So it was not one man, one woman, kind of removing those sex distinctions, said housing needs to be made available without regard to these things. You can't just turn someone away for being trans or for being in a gay marriage. And then they had this rule where you were not allowed to ask about gender or sexual orientation except in like very limited circumstances. Which actually, it sounds great on paper, but it created some nightmares. So anyway, a few years later, Obergefell v. Hodges, I'm not going to get into this in crazy detail because I think a lot of people know about it. A couple states had definitions of marriage that were heterosexual based. The 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause, there's a ton of cases out there that use it. But basically, because family and marriage are such important institutions in American life and American society, in a lot of ways, the 14th Amendment protects some of these basic freedoms, the freedom to have your family, the freedom for parents to raise their children, the freedom for you to get in a marriage. The Obergefell case kind of relied heavily on Loving v. Virginia. That was the case of interracial marriage that legalized interracial marriage some decades prior to this. There's a huge list of cases kind of in this 14th Amendment jurisprudence. I'm not going to get into it, but this was a 5-4 decision, Kennedy writing the majority opinion. One of the kind of interesting things for us in the legal world is that each dissenting justice wrote their own dissent. A lot of times, like they'll join into someone else's dissent, but they had specific words they wanted to say about this case. So that was Obergefell. And then the very next year, Housing and Urban Development, HUD, passed a new rule, and they started addressing some of these problems that I kind of hinted at with the 2012 rule. So gender identity, you can read it here. It's a much longer description, but it's the gender that someone identifies at. You have to follow the gender that someone identifies. You cannot decide someone's gender for them. They get to decide their gender, and you are the one that has to respect their own gender. They know themselves better than you know them. I think this is pretty basic for those of us who work with this a lot. They also kind of revised sexual orientation. They listed those 3 as examples of the sexual orientations you could be, but I think it's a nod to the understanding that for those of you who kind of know the alphabet soup, LGBTQIAAOPF, like there's so many of them that kind of get recognized. Both gender and sexual orientation are just very diverse. The human experience with them is very diverse. They don't fall neatly into very few categories. So this is sort of acknowledging some of that. This specifically says that an individual has to be placed, served, and accommodated in accordance with their gender identity. So again, it's not the provider deciding what gender the person is. It is the person being respected for the gender that they are. This one also had a lot of provisions about guaranteeing equal access. You can't turn people away because of gender identity or sexual orientation. You have to provide them equal access as someone of heterosexuality or binary gender. They put a ban on intrusive questioning and medical evidence. There was some really bad cases where people, show me your genitals and that's where you're going. Cannot do that. That is humiliating. That is degrading. Cannot do that. This is also including in terms of medical evidence, especially in the trans community, pre-operational versus post-operational. Cannot be asking about those things. The status of someone's genitals, you're not asking their doctor what their genitals look like either. That is not the inquiry here. What gender they identify as is the one that you're going to be going with, regardless of what shape their genitals take. So that was, they were trying to address some of those concerns that had been coming up in the past years. Bostock came through. This is a 2020 case. So as you see here, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, it prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex, and they use sex specifically. This was passed in 64, obviously. It's literally right in front of my face. I'm sorry, I wrote these slides so that we could email the presentation out and it would still make sense to everyone. So now I'm kind of narrating the slides. But basically in the Bostock case, it was, does sex include gender identity? It was an employment discrimination case. There were a couple plaintiffs. One of them was a skydiving instructor who was a homosexual man. And basically a client refused to be strapped to him in the skydiving because he was gay. And his employer used that as a basis to fire him. They said, hey, we're losing clients because you're gay. You can't work this job. The other one was I forget exactly their position, but they worked for a funeral funeral place. And I forget exactly what they did, but they were a trans woman. And they had been asked to, that place had strict uniforms. They'd been asked to start wearing the women's uniforms and things like that in accordance with their gender identity. The funeral director, the manager of the funeral place, basically said, look, a lot of our clientele are very, very religious. They do not accept and are not okay with people who are trans. So because you're trans, you're ostracizing our customers and we're going to fire you. So that was kind of the context of this. And it's basically like, does this prohibition on the discrimination on the basis of sex also apply to sexual orientation and gender, the discrimination on the basis of gender identity? And basically, the majority opinion, it was a 6-3 opinion with Gorsuch writing the majority, Trump's appointee Gorsuch writing the majority. And I actually have up here who, I do have up here who concurred and who dissented. But, and they basically said, but for the person's sex, in both cases, in both the skydiving and the funeral director, but for that sex, the person would not have been treated that way. The trans person's sex had not been male, then they would not have been fired for being trans. If the gay man's sex had not been male, then his relationship with men would not have been a problem. So that was kind of the reasoning on this. But basically, because Title VII is the Civil Rights Act of 1964, everyone probably has heard of it. It's this massive act. Title VII is huge. This is where all of the hostile work environment claims come from, all sexual discrimination in the workforce comes from, sexual harassment law comes from this same law, all of that. It's a massive law. So it got expanded to include gender identity and sexual orientation. So after that, the executive agencies got to keep up, right? So in 2021, President Biden issued this executive order. It is 4 pages and very, very easy to read and very broadly written. It is not specific. It does not have great guidance. It's basically like discrimination on the basis of gender is bad and we should not do it anymore. So the big thing of it is it ordered all the federal agencies, you have to review everything you're doing, your rules, your orders, your regulations, your guidance documents, your policies, your programs, every action you do that implicate Title VII from Bostock, the discrimination on the basis of sex, and anything that's inconsistent, you got to fix it. That's a huge undertaking to review every single thing. But that was what it did. It also addressed the intersection of race and gender. But like I said, it's kind of this broad thing that's basically like, discrimination is bad, federal government, fix it. And it's 4 pages. You can read it if you want. It's not in like legalese, hard language like some of these court cases. So then the implementation of this, HUD published this in its specific guidance. It's also pretty short and pretty clear and easy to read and not very long. But anyone who's getting federal money is going to have to follow these rules. So even if it's a private agency that's working with federal agencies to provide these services, still are not allowed to discriminate on the basis of sex or gender. And they're trying to really double down on complaints. So the thing is that we know people who are involved in these housing programs a lot of times do experience discrimination on the basis of their gender identity or their sexual orientation. That's a fact of life. It sucks, it's, but they really, really want to take these complaints seriously because we know it's happening and we know it's awful to experience and to endure, and people should not have to live in those things. So there's that. Very brief slide on sort of what this means for providers. Basically, the eligibility, you cannot make it based on someone's sexual orientation, gender identity. I put marital status in there because it kind of ties in marital status with being married in a homosexual relationship or non-heterosexual relationship, I should say. But whether or not someone is eligible for the services should not be solely based on like whether they're cisgender or transgender, for instance. Need equal access to HUD-assisted housing programs or facilities consistent with a person's sexual orientation, gender identity, or marital status. Again, if a trans person is identifying as a specific gender, that's the facility that they need to be in, not some anatomical or biological or chromosomal or birth certificate-based gender. What the person is identifying as is their gender, and they need to be placed there. This also, we hear steering a lot, but can't just take people and put them in substandard housing because of a protected characteristic. Gender is a protected characteristic. You can't just steer them into substandard housing because they're trans, because they're gay, or anything like that. Cannot ask anyone to provide anatomical information, physical evidence, or medical evidence. Again, please do not ask someone to pull their pants down in front of you. I think that's a little bit obvious. But even like medical records of surgery, do not ask for it. Birth certificates, do not ask for it. In general, in the LGBT community, asking for pronouns is fine. It's not seen as something disrespectful. I think in certain contexts, you could make it disrespectful, like, oh yeah, you're a woman, what are your pronouns? But I think in general, if you're trying to service a client and you just politely ask them for their pronouns, generally A-okay. So that's a better way to do it than asking them to pull their pants down. And then just the last ones, addressing privacy concerns and complaints very, very, very seriously. People are not lying and exaggerating about these things. These things are really happening. They are problematic, and there is federal law that says that providers are not allowed to discriminate on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation, and that encompasses a wide variety of gender identities and sexual orientations. So that was my little spiel. I'm sorry, I'm a really fast talker. I know I've been criticized for that before. I guess now would probably be a good time to take questions. If anyone has any. No, you guys are all experts on the legal bases of this. And, I mean, that's great. I'll give it a few more minutes while you're thinking of questions. You're welcome to ask me. If it's okay with you, Victoria, I'm just going to plug my program very briefly.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So I just want to let you know, I work for Bay Area Legal Services in the veterans side of things. We have the medical legal partnership. It's very successful. We provide civil legal services to veterans at Bay Pines and the Sarasota Bradenton community-based clinics. Recently, Bay Area was granted a VA grant, a new one that allowed them to hire an attorney. Me, I took this position. Specifically for veterans who are unhoused or who are at imminent risk of becoming unhoused. And that includes things like couch surfing, paying to stay in a motel, staying in like an overcrowded efficiency, those types of situations. And it allows me to spend a lot more time on the case and provide extended legal services, including things like discharge upgrades, and get character of service determination so that they can become eligible for things like HUD VASH, even if they have bad paper discharges. I can help them in housing law, I can help them in family law, I can help them in consumer financial protection law, contract law. There's a lot of different things that I can try to help with. So I just wanted to quickly plug it. If you know of any veteran, especially any unhoused veteran, honestly, any unhoused veteran that could use free legal services, I put the number up here. That is the number that the veterans can call. When they call that number, they're going to talk to a paralegal. Our office has like a bunch of different grants and a bunch of different eligibility requirements. So the paralegal kind of screens them, sees what situation, and then assigns them to an attorney, which is helpful. Then I don't have to screen them and then be sending them off to different attorneys and things like that. But veterans are welcome to call that line. I need referrals. I want referrals. I want to help people. Please use it. And then I do just have contact information for my office. If you are curious about our programs or want to talk to me or have questions after this, or just want to grab a cup of coffee, there's lots of cute places in St. Pete. I love it. You've got my email and phone number, as well as my the managing attorney for the St. Petersburg office, her email and phone number. That Veteran Legal Services is the same phone number from the last one. I really want you guys to encourage, especially unhoused veterans, to call and to reach out if they have any legal needs. Anyway, so that was my tiny little plug about my services. So thank you for granting me that time. Does anyone have any questions? I'm not seeing it. I can stay on the line for a little while if anyone wants to talk.
Was there any discussion about this rule going away at one point? I thought I remember that being in the news.
As of right now, this is federal law. I am not very familiar with the conversations about it being repealed at this time. Challenged, yes. Do I think the challenges are going to be successful? I refuse to predict what a court is going to do because they've done things that have surprised me repeatedly. However, based on what I saw in Bostock, I actually really don't think this is going to go away. The equal access to services on the basis of gender.
That's a good thing. Thank you.
Yeah. Courts could surprise me though.
Will you be sharing your deck, the slideshow with us as well?
Yes, absolutely. I don't know, Victoria, if you want to send it out or if you just want me to drop it in the chat or something.
We can do both. Okay. Yeah. And does Bay Area Legal Services have any advice, you know, if we as providers have somebody come to us and say, hey, we've just gone through this process and, you know, this was our experience and we feel as though they're facing discrimination, you know, as to how we should handle that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the general guidance, like take it very, very seriously. I understand that a lot of these different providers and organizations have their own internal policies on how to deal with complaints. But I think one of the biggest things is like, don't be dismissive. That was kind of what I was seeing in like a lot of the comments when I was looking into these laws and things like that, is that these complaints were not being taken very seriously, or they were kind of being shunted and ignored and things like that. Just make sure that like document it. Lawyers love documentation. We're always going to tell you to write things down. Sorry. But like document what they say, document the complaint, try to get, you know, time and date. And then just, you know, try to make sure that it gets addressed and that that person gets, you know, connected to the avenues within your organization that they need to be connected with.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. What about our housing providers? I know that there are a couple of folks from housing authorities on here. Do y'all have any questions for Ms. Cameron while she's on the line? Not everybody all at once now.
I don't bite, I promise.
Okay, what about our housing coordinators, housing navigators, housing specialists? Anybody here on the line have any questions for Ms. Cameron? All right. I think that you are in the clear then.
Thank you all so much for being here. I really hope that you will be sending referrals and that I hear from you with my contact information. It's really nice being here. And thank you so much, Victoria, for setting this up.
Thank you so much for hosting this. We really appreciate it. This is some good information, some quick information, but some very good information. So thank you very much. And folks, I will share the recording of this as well as these slides in email this week. So thank you very much. And I hope to see y'all at next week's Domestic Violence 101 training. Thank you very much.